right now. Are you safe? Half shouting, I check on Jace's safety, who I suspect is at the scene of the fire. But on the other end of the phone, he dismisses me with an air of annoyance. What's this all about? I'm at work, you know, and don't call me when I'm working. He grumbles and abruptly hangs up. There's no way someone could be casually working at the site of a fire. Upon realizing Jace isn't at his workplace, I am convinced of his betrayal. I decide to execute the plan I had been preparing for a while. My name is Julia Gomez, 29 years old. As a nurse working in a hospital, I confront numerous patients every day. Even now as an adult, I enjoy being of help to others, having always been told that I'm good at caring for others and I enjoy taking care of people. That's why I even think of nursing as my true calling. I have a beloved husband, Jace, whom I've been married to for 2 years, and we've enjoyed our married life in his company housing. I met Jace through a mutual acquaintance 3 years ago. At a drinking party where a few friends gathered, Jace, perhaps because of his shyness, got drunk at a fast pace and went down early. Whether it's because of my profession as a nurse or my inherent personality, I couldn't leave a drunk Jace alone and ended up taking care of him at my place, despite it being our first meeting. The next day, Jace, who didn't remember anything, said with a serious look, "I'll take responsibility," to which I burst out laughing. After explaining the situation to the confused him and assuring him that nothing inappropriate happened, he apologized sheepishly. That's how our relationship began, and we got married after dating for a year. Now, as we approach our 3rd year of marriage, we don't have any children yet, but I believe I can build a warm family with Jace. However, recently his work has been busy, his weekend work has increased, and he often comes home with a cold attitude. Moreover, even when we're sitting on the sofa watching TV together, he's constantly looking at his smartphone screen and sighing deeply. At first I wondered, did I do something to upset him? And I tried to recall my actions, but nothing came to mind. Gradually, I became worried about Jace's health, so I started researching well-balanced menus and preparing more substantial meals for his lunchbox and dinner. On that day, my hospital operates on a 2-shift system of day and night, and I was originally scheduled to work the night shift that day. However, I got a message from a colleague the day before asking me to switch from night to day shift, so I quickly changed to the day shift. I had originally told Jace that I was on the night shift, so I intended to tell him about the shift change, but things were hectic and I ended up contacting him on the day itself. I sent him a message saying, "I switched to the day shift today, so I'll cook dinner and wait for you," but the reply was slow to come. I thought he might be busy with work, and while I was focusing on my duties, a few hours later I got a reply saying, "Understood." Before, even during work, he would reply quickly and sometimes use emojis in his texts, but lately, his replies have been short. Is he that busy, or is this what happens after 2 years of marriage? Feeling a little lonely, I hurried home after buying ingredients at the supermarket after work, determined to cook a nutritious meal again today. Today's cooking was a great success, even by my standards. I dish up the finished meal, take a quick photo, and post it on my cooking account on social media. While I enjoy cooking for Jace, posting photos of my cooking on social media has also become something I look forward to. A few minutes after posting the photo, I get a notification on my social media. Haha, they're commenting again so soon. One of my cooking friends I met through my social media cooking account has been commenting a lot lately. It was refreshing to have a connection different from my work colleagues, and it made me happy. While I was doing that, Jace came home from work, and I, who had been waiting to have dinner with him, hurriedly reheated the food. "Welcome home, dinner's ready. Did you have a busy day again?" Thanks. Yeah, I guess so, I'm tired. But more importantly, you had a sudden shift to day work, huh? I see Jace, who's changed into his loungewear, sit down in his chair looking exhausted and bring over the reheated food. "Yeah, a colleague had an urgent matter. Sorry for the late notice." I also sit down at the table and start eating dinner saying, "Let's eat." "No, it's fine. It was a sudden decision after all, but I'd like you to tell me earlier in the future. Sometimes I have plans to go drinking with colleagues." "Ah, I see. Got it." While saying that, I noticed that Jace hadn't been eating much since earlier. Is the food not very good? Could it be that it didn't suit his taste? Worried, I asked, and Jace's hand holding the fork stopped dead in its tracks. Then he opened his mouth with a somewhat awkward expression. "No, that's not it. I just don't seem to have an appetite. Sorry, I'll eat it for breakfast tomorrow." Jace, giving a forced laugh, said, "Thanks for the meal," got up from his seat and headed towards the bathroom. More than half the food was still left on the table, just as I thought. With a certain conviction, I followed Jace, who was heading to the bathroom. "Hey, are you feeling okay? You haven't seemed well recently. I'm worried. You should go to the doctor." Jace, brushing his teeth in the bathroom, rinsed his mouth and laughed off my words. "I'm fine. Oh, maybe it's because I haven't been exercising lately. I'm going for a walk now." Saying this, Jace tidied himself up and quickly headed to the front door. "I'll go with you," I said, but was gently turned down. Even more worried, I decided to secretly follow Jace, who'd gone out, just in case he collapsed on the way, so I could go help right away. Even though that's what I was thinking on the surface, somewhere in my heart there might have already been a different anxiety swirling around. That anxiety was soon confirmed as I started tailing him. Contrary to my concerns, Jace, who was walking spiritedly, stops in front of a park a short distance from the house. He looked around and seemed to be contacting someone on his smartphone. Then, a white car pulled up. Jace approached the white car and chatted briefly with the person in the driver's seat. It's too dark to see clearly. As I got a little closer, I could see the person in the driver's seat. A young woman with long curly hair giving a seductive impression. The moment I saw her, my hand naturally pulled out my phone and activated the camera. Jace getting in the passenger seat, the woman laughing. I reflexively captured the scene in a photo, and by the time I had came to my senses, the car with the two of them had driven off. Surprise, along with confusion, suspicion, and various emotions swirled around in my head, leaving me unable to move from the spot. Then, a message came from Jace saying, "I bumped into a friend, so I'll be home a bit late." A friend? By chance? The scene from earlier was burned into my eyelids, and I just couldn't bring myself to believe Jace's words. That night, Jace didn't come home until after 1 a.m. My anxiety had reached its limit when, with the tears spilling out, I thrust the photo I'd taken at Jace. Seeing the photo, Jace froze, then quickly laughed it off. "Oh, I just ran into a client salesperson while I was on my walk." "I was just giving advice, nothing more. Trust me." He looked at me with a sad expression like a victim, giving me the sense that he wouldn't allow any further questioning. After that, Jace's work became extremely busy, and I often had to work overtime on the days when I was on the day shift. Even amidst our conflicting schedules, I tried to find time to talk about the incident from before, but was dismissed with, "I'm tired." Overtime yesterday, working on a day off today, really? During work, whenever my guard was let down, the image of Jace and that woman being close would come to mind, making me feel uneasy. Finishing my night shift, the morning sun was piercing to my tired eyes. I realized I had been neglecting myself recently due to all the worry and anxiety, so I stopped by a cake shop that was open early in the morning and bought a cake. With my mood slightly lifted, I left the store and took a different route home. There were many hotels in this area, and I often saw couples that looked like they were up to something, but maybe because it was early morning, there was a quiet atmosphere. While walking carefully so as to not damage the cake, thinking things like, "I have some tea at home, maybe we can drink it together," I caught a glimpse of a young man and woman coming out of a hotel on the opposite sidewalk. I casually glanced over and froze. There was Jace, squinting his sleepy eyes and smiling, and the woman with the long curly hair who was in the car that day smiling back at him. The cake I was holding slipped from my hand and squished as it hit the ground. In my whitening head, only the sense of mission to leave evidence remained. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and took a picture of the two of them, arm in arm and smiling at each other. The two of them captured in the snapshot looked just like a couple. My heart was pounding and I was breaking out in a cold sweat, as I thought Jace had been lying. In my view was the cake box that had fallen to the ground and the photo of the two. Staring blankly at them, I was thinking in the corner of my mind, I can't be with him anymore. One day, when the series of events had turned my suspicions about Jace into certainty, the word divorce took on a sense of reality. That day, I was working the day shift busy as usual. Just as I was handling a phone call, I heard sirens from far off and could tell that fire trucks were passing through the neighborhood. It wasn't just one, but 2 or 3 in succession, which made me worried that there might be a fire somewhere. After finishing the call and taking a breather, 2 of my colleagues who had gone to the patient's room returned, talking about how scary it was. "Good work, what happened?" Thinking there might be some trouble, I asked, and they lowered their voices to tell me, "There's a fire at Company A. A patient we just passed in the hall said so." Company A? A fire? The moment I heard those words, a cold sweat trickled down my back. Excusing myself to my colleagues and gripping my phone, I quickly headed to a secluded spot. Company A, where the fire was reported, was where Jace worked. With a prayer-like feeling, I called Jace. As usual, I had seen him off to work that morning. Since the series of events, we hardly saw each other at home and talked less, but I never missed seeing him off in the morning. Please pick up. As if my prayer had been answered, on the third or fourth ring, I heard Jace's voice say, "Hello? Where are you? Are you okay?" To me, who was half shouting to confirm his safety, the man himself sounded annoyed. "What's the matter all of a sudden? I'm at work, you know, and don't call me during work hours." He grumbled and hung up after a single sentence. Only the end of call tone, a beeping sound came through my earpiece. From Jace's response, I was relieved to know that he wasn't caught in the fire, but I felt a big discomfort. There's no way he could be working normally at a place where a fire was happening. Furthermore, I was increasingly angered by his words and attitude, which seemed to trample on my feelings of concern. Jace is probably not at work right now. I saw him off to work as usual today, but the place he went to was definitely not his workplace. Since we got married, I might have unknowingly been seeing him off to another woman's place all along. Out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw his shimmering, long, curly hair. I made up my mind and made a call to a certain person from my clenched phone. After finishing my work safely, I hurried home and began to pack up the furniture and appliances around the house. Then the doorbell rang. Ding dong! When I opened the front door, it was not Jace standing there, but a friend from college. This friend knew about me and Jace's situation and had volunteered to help with this running away from home. Despite my sudden request for help moving my belongings from work, she readily agreed. "Thank you so much, I'll treat you to something next time." Feeling apologetic, I said, but she returned with a smile. "You've had it tough, haven't you? I'm always ready to help." I felt grateful for having such a good friend, a feeling that had faded recently, and my heart warmed. Together, we moved out the furniture and appliances and also loaded the clothes I had prepared in advance into the car. The room, now missing the furniture and appliances I had been using since my single days, had hardly any belongings left and seemed very empty. Looking at such a room, I asked myself again if I had any lingering attachments to my past life. No, I don't need it anymore. Without feeling any pull to stay, I briskly turned on my heel. My destination was an apartment near my workplace. Actually, on the day I saw Jace leaving a hotel with a woman, I went straight to a real estate agent in a rush. I wasn't sure about getting a divorce yet, but I had rented an apartment just in case. Pleased with my own decision, I checked the items I had moved into the apartment and began to unpack. Then, I remembered something and pulled out my phone. Holding the phone to my ear, I waited for the robotic voice guidance to start. Several hours later, after settling down from moving, while I was taking a break, I got a line call. Checking the display, I saw the name Jace. Exhaling deeply, I waited a moment before answering. "Hello?" "Julia, where are you? When I got home, it was empty and I can't use my phone anymore. What's going on?" Most of the stuff at home was originally mine, so I just took it with me. And as for the phone, it was under my name, so I canceled it. His frantic voice came through the phone, but I calmly stated the facts. "By the way, isn't your phone unusable?" "Well, I'm only able to use Line because I'm connected to Wi-Fi. No, more importantly, you said you took the stuff. You're not seriously running away, are you? This is a joke, right?" As I heard Jace still not understanding the situation, my irritation grew. "Are you seriously saying that? Don't tell me you forgot about the call this afternoon. Someone who's at work can't just keep working calmly when there's a fire happening, right?" Struggling to keep my voice from shaking with anger, I asked something I wanted to know for a long time. "Where were you and who were you with instead of going to work?" At my question, Jace took a breath and fell silent. After a brief silence, Jace, perhaps unable to withstand my silent pressure, reluctantly began to speak. "Look, the story about bumping into a female client while walking, it was a lie. The truth is, she's a colleague from work and I was at her place today." What Jace confessed was the story I had anticipated. He had been involved with the company receptionist, Savannah, for about 6 months. He had been seeing her on the days I worked the night shift. But recently, as Savannah became more demanding, he had lied about having to work overtime on his days off just to see her. And today, they both had taken paid leave and spent the day at Savannah's house. They only found out about the fire when Savannah's phone received a call from their office. Having confessed everything, Jace still pleaded over the phone. "I want you to forgive me." I thought, what a joke. I'm glad to finally hear the truth from you, Jace. Despite our short marriage, I was doing my best to build a good family life. Over the phone, I could tell that Jace was trying to stop me, saying, wait, but I ignored him and said, I want a divorce due to your infidelity. Let's discuss the issues of damage through our lawyers. Goodbye. Jace seemed to have something else to say, but seeing my firm stance, he finally gave up, murmuring, okay. Afterwards, the fire at Company A was reported in local news, becoming quite a big story. Seeing the news, I froze. The culprit behind the fire was none other than Jace's mistress, Savannah. Early in the morning, Savannah had snuck into the company's conference room, pulled a thread from the edge of a curtain, and lit it with a lighter. The fire quickly spread throughout the curtain, resulting in the conference room being burnt down. Fortunately, the building itself only suffered minor damage, but from the surveillance footage, it was clear that Savannah was the perpetrator. As for her motive, Savannah said that the married man she was dating wouldn't divorce his wife, and even her threats of exposing their relationship to the company had no effect. She claimed she thought she had to do something drastic. To be honest, I didn't understand why anyone would want to commit a crime just to be with Jace. However, according to Savannah's colleagues, she often complained about being lonely. Perhaps she envied the married man who seemed to have everything, thinking that having him would fill her own loneliness. Thinking this far, I suddenly realized that feeling lonely even when you're with someone is far more painful. After the divorce talk, I hadn't been in direct contact with Jace, but the divorce proceedings were advancing through our lawyers. In the meantime, I heard about what was happening at Jace's company. After the fire broke out, Jace, who knew nothing about it, was apparently surprised when he heard the truth about the incident from the company's general affair representative. Savannah was arrested immediately, and news of their relationship spread quickly throughout the company. Unable to bear the gossip any longer, Jace resigned from his job. Hearing about all this, I felt a tiny bit of sympathy, but I mostly thought that Jace had brought this upon himself by choosing another woman. With that in mind, I went through the divorce process without much emotion, and we successfully divorced. The process was made smooth by the pictures of Jace's infidelity that I had taken on my phone. Additionally, I made sure that the alimony was properly paid from Jace's severance pay. Now that my connection with Jace was completely severed, I was enjoying living alone in my new apartment where I had become quite settled. Perhaps I had been neglecting myself by always putting others first. While continuing my job as a nurse, I started to enjoy cooking, which had been my greatest pleasure during my marriage with Jace, just for myself. In the morning, I opened the window of my apartment to let in the fresh air. Glancing outside, I saw a family of 3 walking together happily. Seeing that, I felt no regret at all, and rather, I felt excited thinking about my future. Just then, my phone buzzed. I returned to my room and couldn't help but smile at the screen. I had hit it off with someone I connected with on a cooking account on social media, and we had become close in no time. We had made a plan to cook together that day. Responding to the message saying, "I'll be there soon," I got started on preparing the meal we were going to cook.
Here, we're going to clear this area and turn it into a bed and breakfast. Upon hearing David's words, both Julie and I exclaimed in surprise simultaneously. Huh? What are you talking about? In addition to our surprise, the scene unfolding before us convinced us without a doubt that this was the aftermath of our family home being demolished. Hey, could you explain in a way we can understand? Is this your doing? Despite David's continued smirking, I pressed on with a stronger tone. Seeing David's demeanor, Julie suddenly burst into laughter. Wait a minute, stop it, Dad. It seems that Julie is filled with both pity and amusement from the bottom of her heart at the absurdity of her father's incomprehensible words and actions, which have bound her up until now. Struggling for breath, Julie speaks. Grandpa's place had so much value, you know? After saying that, Julie suddenly returns to a serious expression. Isn't this just plain criminal? Upon hearing her daughter's words, David finally realizes the irreversibility of his mistake. My name is Nellie. I am a 48-year-old homemaker. Currently, I live with my husband, David, and our only daughter, Julie. Julie is a 19-year-old college student, and it seems she has no intention of leaving home for the time being. As females, having Julie by my side as an ally since childhood has been a blessing for me. Especially with David as our common enemy. David and I first met when I was still working as an office worker. I had graduated from a junior college and was working as a clerk at a local trading company. David, who was working in sales at another company, frequently visited our office. Although sales sounds prestigious, David seemed to be doing more of the grunt work, hopping from one company to another. Despite always bowing and scraping, David was always friendly and courteous to me, even though I was just a clerk. Over time, as we met almost weekly, we began to chat and eventually developed a close relationship. As I had anticipated, David seemed to be treated as a gopher at his company, with little income to show for it. However, perhaps due to my youthfulness, I wholeheartedly believed that love could conquer all. For a while, I also worked to support the household, but I ended up resigning from my job when I became pregnant. David expressed his desire for me to focus on childcare and stay at home. When Julie was born, naturally, my responsibilities increased significantly. During the day, while David was at work, I had to take care of Julie and manage all the household chores such as cooking, laundry, and cleaning by myself. I managed to get through these days somehow, but by the time Julie entered kindergarten, David's attitude towards me had changed. Taking advantage of my silence, David's behavior became increasingly dominant. Every day at work, I was ridiculed and exploited. I became the target of David's frustration. Initially, I wasn't so submissive, but perhaps I contributed to the problem by aligning too much with David. People at work just keep dumping all their problems on you, David. They don't appreciate your abilities. You shouldn't worry about it. Intending to console him, but it only fueled David's distorted confidence. Are you mocking me too, thinking you can do whatever you want? Whenever I tried to offer even a little criticism, David would react with anger. This made me feel helpless, and I found myself unable to say anything. It was my accumulation of actions like this that fueled David's growing arrogance. The sacrifices I made for my daughter undoubtedly contributed to the current state of our marriage. However, I only tried to be a kind wife and didn't do anything deserving of blame. It sounds absurd when I think about it, but even then, my desire for the sake of my daughter would halt my critical thinking. As we grew older, our relationship as a couple became more strained. While my role as a homemaker remained unchanged, there's a societal expectation for individuals to hold positions and statuses corresponding to their age. Even though I didn't voice these thoughts, they were conveyed through my attitude. David overly perceived such societal expectations from others, and it exacerbated his negative traits. His personality became increasingly submissive, and conversing with him would leave me feeling incredibly drained. I didn't realize this before marriage, but it seems David's character hasn't changed since childhood, and he seems to lack any close friends. At our wedding, only David's relatives were present, and there were no friends in sight. At the time, I didn't dwell on it, but looking back, it's quite odd. I still regret not noticing these nuances about David during our courtship. While his position in the company may be lower compared to others, there are many in similar situations. If I were constantly nagged by my family when I got home, I might understand why, but I've never once complained to David about such things. Therefore, no matter what I do, David's attitude never changes. Originally reserved, David never vents this stress outside, and all of it is directed towards me and Julie. His alcohol consumption increases day by day, and each time, he raises his voice and breaks things in the house. Although he never lays a hand on us or causes direct harm, the exchange of hurtful words escalated. Do you know who's responsible for you being able to go to college? Always clinging to your mom. Think about who you should be grateful to. It's common to hear about teenage daughters disliking their fathers, but Julie has solid reasons for hating David. With daily unjustified scolding like this, it's only natural for her to dislike her father. Julie and I would vent to each other when David wasn't around, trying to get through each day somehow. Meanwhile, our father, who lives in the same prefecture, fell ill. Since our mother passed away a few years ago, our father has been living alone in the family home. My brother, Joe, who runs a company in the city, so for the time being, it was up to me to check on our father's condition. The diagnosis our father received at the hospital was not good news. I blame myself for not noticing earlier. Despite living apart, our father, mindful of my brother and me with our families, had noticed his health changes but kept quiet. After consulting with doctors, it was decided that he would be hospitalized, and treatment would continue as much as possible. Still, it was evident that my father's condition was worsening day by day, and Bob would often leave work to come and see our father. I had prepared myself for this. Naturally, I also continued to visit the hospital every day. Even though I'm a homemaker, everything at home couldn't continue as usual. Julie also visited my father's bedside a few times and willingly helped me. But David wasn't pleased with that. "Have there been more frozen meals lately? You're at home all day, so there shouldn't be a need for frozen food, right? And relying on our daughter only at times like this. You need to consider our lifestyle too." He berated me mercilessly, while also making snide remarks to my father. After all the times we relied on my father for help, it's surprising he can say such things. Has he forgotten how much trouble he's caused my father? When Julie was born, there were times when David's earnings weren't enough to cover our expenses. I quit my job to focus on childcare, which meant our expenses increased by one person. As expected, David showed no remorse and pressured me to figure something out. Feeling helpless, I explained the situation to my father and asked for financial assistance. Even though my father knew about David's situation, he didn't say anything and silently provided financial support. Without realizing my father's feelings, David took advantage of his kindness for a while. With David's income slightly increasing during that time, we managed to get by, but he never expressed any gratitude to my father. To avoid upsetting David's mood, I would deflect the conversation, and I continued to visit my father. However, shortly thereafter, my father's condition suddenly worsened, and he passed away. Julie and I were overwhelmed with a great sense of loss, but there were so many things that needed to be done. Various procedures, paperwork submissions, funeral preparations, and more. Just thinking about it made my head spin, but staying busy helped distract my mind. At that moment, despite knowing I was nearby, David muttered under his breath, "Now we can finally have decent meals." I was infuriated by David's insensitive remark, but I had no energy to argue, so I swallowed my words. Although my father's funeral had concluded, my spirits remained heavy. Oddly, David showed a cooperative attitude when it came to sorting through the belongings at my parents' house. Perhaps he was reflecting on his past behavior, as he willingly helped tidy up the entire house. "I've gathered the documents, but is this everything?" His words reminded me of the safe tucked away in the closet by my father, so I asked David to check its contents as well. I also remembered that my father had entrusted the safe's key to me when he was hospitalized, so I handed the small key to David. These were the only items in the safe. David handed me old banknotes and documents with family trees written on them that he had taken out of the safe. I wasn't expecting much, but since he went out of his way to hand me the key, I thought there might be something more important inside. Therefore, I was somewhat disappointed by the contents of the safe handed to me by David. I lightly shrugged it off and decided to return to the remaining sorting work. It didn't finish that day, but over the next few days, we completed the cleanup of my parents' house. Finally able to take a breather, I was overwhelmed with exhaustion. At that moment, I received a call from my brother who had returned to the city. "I'm really sorry for leaving everything to you and not being able to help. If there's anything I can do, just let me know without hesitation." Expressing his gratitude to me multiple times before getting to the point. "By the way, did Dad have the deed to the family house among the documents he kept? It might seem cowardly to bring this up after Dad's passing, but I need to talk to you about it." With that, he began to discuss the inheritance of Dad's remaining assets. As my brother, who runs a company that handles various businesses, was considering entering the food and beverage industry, he wanted to acquire the rights to the family house. We had vaguely heard about it since childhood, but the house we lived in supposedly had cultural value. It was built in a unique style and, now that I think about it, resembled the trendy old folkhouse cafes. It seemed that my brother's plan was to utilize the family house as it is and open a cafe. Actually, I had been getting permission from Dad for a long time. In exchange, Dad said he would give everything else to Nellie. I know it's late, but could you agree to this? My brother, who has always been fond of me since childhood and is still single, wouldn't be thinking about getting a large portion of the inheritance for himself or his family. I know well enough that my brother has more than enough savings. If it's all right with you, brother, even if I were to inherit the family home, there's nothing I could do with it. I readily agreed with my brother's wishes and decided to transfer the rights to the family home to him. Even if I were to manage it, eventually it would have to be demolished. So, it's better for my brother to make good use of it and keep the family home intact. Thank you. Could you look for the deed to the family home among the documents Dad left behind? Since David had consolidated the documents in one place, it should be in there. I told my brother that I would contact him as soon as I found the documents, and we hung up for the day. Come to think of it, I haven't looked through the documents since then. I'm pretty sure I put them all in a clear case. I recalled the case where I had stored the documents entrusted to me by David, and I searched through it. However, no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't find the deed to the family home my brother had mentioned. That's odd. I'm sure I put all the documents in here. Could it still be lying around in the family home? I felt a pang of anxiety, wondering if I had accidentally thrown it away, but for now, I had to go to the family home to find out. I didn't want to continue living with this uncertainty in my heart, so I immediately decided to go to the family home to confirm. Arriving at the family home, I couldn't believe my eyes. Where the family home should have stood, there were countless debris scattered around, seemingly from a demolished building. Did I take a wrong turn somewhere? But this doesn't make sense. In a panic, I contacted Julie and explained the situation. About my brother's plan to renovate the family home into a cafe, and about the cultural value of the family home. Julie must have sensed my distress over the phone because she said, "I'm coming right away," and hung up. True to her word, Julie rushed to where I was soon after. "Mom! What's wrong?" She seemed to have hurried a lot, her long hair tousled. Breathlessly, Julie looked at me with concern. I can't find our house." As I repeated the situation to Julie, I gradually regained my composure. "Mom, you're not wrong. This is definitely Grandpa's place." As Julie said, the fact that she came straight to where I was meant that this was undoubtedly my family home. No, it was where the family home used to stand. It had only been a few weeks since Dad's funeral. I had no idea what had happened. Could it be that my brother knows something? Such a thought crossed my mind, but we had just talked on the phone a moment ago. That couldn't be it. If not, then I was even more clueless about why the family home had been demolished. From the scene, it seemed like construction was still ongoing, but there was no sign of anyone around. What should I do in a situation like this? Call the police? While listening to Julie's opinion, I tried to calm my increasingly confused mind. As we deliberated, I noticed someone walking towards us from the other side. "Hey! Could that be Dad coming this way?" Julie exclaimed, surprised. I squinted to confirm as the figure approached. Sure enough, it was indeed my husband, just as Julie had said. He was walking unsteadily towards us, his suit disheveled. It was only just past 3 p.m. Was he returning from work? Even so, it was strange to coincidentally meet here. My already confused mind became even more complicated with my husband's arrival, and all I could do was wait for him to speak. As David approached us, I could see a smirk playing on his lips, sending a shiver down my spine despite him being my husband. Well, what a pleasant surprise to find you both here," he said with that smirk still firmly in place, coming to a stop in front of me and Julie. Both Julie and I were rendered speechless by the strangeness of the situation, waiting for David to explain. "I'm turning this place into a guest house," he declared, still grinning. Julie and I both gasped in shock at David's words. What? What are you talking about?" Simultaneously, We both realized that the scene before us was undoubtedly the aftermath of our family home being demolished. However, yes, that's right, was not an acceptable answer. What on earth was David thinking? Even as I racked my brain trying to figure out his intentions, I couldn't come up with an answer. Hey, can you explain to us in a way that we can understand? Is this your doing? I pressed, my tone growing more forceful in the face of David's continued smirk. Yeah, it's all me. We need to clear this space to move forward. I plan to use the savings and retirement money I've diligently set aside to build a guest house. Of course, you'll have to chip in too. David's tone was somewhat pompous, and he showed no remorse whatsoever. Was there a legitimate reason behind this outrageous act? David seemed to sense a mixture of anger and bewilderment on Julie's and my faces, and he appeared somewhat irritated by it. Nevertheless, he continued on as if resigned to it. I've been wanting to start something on my own for a while now. Everyone just bosses me around without recognizing my talents. I can't stand it anymore. That's why I've decided to operate a guest house here. With a confident air, David delivered his statement, then once again gauged our reactions. However, receiving such an explanation only deepened our confusion. I'm sorry, but I have no idea what you're talking about. I confessed, feeling a creeping sense of fear at his nonsensical behavior. I just quit my job at the company. I told off all those annoying jerks and handed in my resignation. Dad's passing at this moment is a message to me. It's finally time for me to take charge. While David's words were somewhat disjointed due to his excitement, his intentions were clear. Essentially, he was quitting his job to run a guest house. He wanted to become the leader without anyone questioning him, to move forward with his life. This is Dad's and brother's property, isn't it? Do you really think you can get away with doing this without permission? It seems like Dad had been talking about handing over the rights to the family home and land to David for a while, so I can't believe he would have given those rights to David. I can't imagine my brother is deceiving me, and besides, it's not normal for a husband like him to quit his job and demolish the family home without consulting his wife. I've got the deed, so I don't need anyone's permission. Being tasked with sorting out the estate means we can do whatever we want with what's left, right? As your husband, I can do whatever I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. David seemed to have no sense of guilt and answered me and Julie with a somewhat teaching tone. That kind of reasoning won't fly at all. I yelled as soon as David finished speaking. His selfish and childish thinking pushed me over the edge. That's my father's house. Both my brother and I inherited it from our father. How dare you, someone not even related by blood, do something like this without permission? David seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation a little as he received my scolding. Although a faint smile briefly crossed his face, he quickly justified his actions again. What's with that tone toward your husband? Who do you think has been supporting us all this time? You both should just shut up and do as I say. David's face turned bright red, and he raised his voice without restraint. Perhaps the excitement was taking a toll on his body, as he began to pant heavily. Seeing him in such a state, Julie suddenly burst into laughter. Hold on, stop it, Dad. Tears welled up in Julie's eyes. It seems like she is filled with both pity and amusement from her father's inexplicable and comical behavior, which has kept her restrained for so long. Dad, don't you know? Julie addressed her father while he was struggling to catch his breath, staring at his daughter. Grandpa's house was worth a lot, you know? And you just went ahead and destroyed the house Mom got from Uncle. Julie's tone suddenly turned serious. Isn't that just a regular old crime? Perhaps receiving a reality check from his college student daughter's observation, David's face quickly drained of color. What are you saying? How dare you say such things to your father? He raised his voice, but there was no vigor or dignity in it. It seemed like he had realized his mistake somewhere along the line. He tried to push through with momentum, but once his daughter pointed it out, there was no turning back. Neither my brother nor I could possibly condone such behavior. For now, I'll contact my brother. The project to turn this place into a cafe should be in progress. David was aware that my brother runs the company, so those words alone were enough to understand the situation. What? That's bad, really bad. We've already got media coverage, and contracts are in progress. I'll call you back later, but please, don't touch that place anymore. After hearing my frantic explanation over the phone, my brother seemed to lose his composure and hung up. Anyway, he said not to do anything else. This has turned into a disaster. It seemed like my brother's voice leaked through the phone, as both Julie and David's faces twisted in concern. It appears that David had been planning to build a guest house at this location since he mentioned tidying up the belongings. He was helping to tidy up the family home with the intention of finding the property deed. I didn't know about turning this house into a cafe. Isn't it common sense to mention such important things beforehand? Until a moment ago, David's face had been pale, but now he was shifting the blame onto me and my brother, completely disregarding his own actions. His face regained its arrogance, telling a story of innocence, as if he had done nothing wrong. Anyway, don't do anything else from now on. My brother is urgently contacting our business partners. I was astonished by David's audacity and decided to wait for my brother's call. Suddenly, I noticed a man in a suit running towards us from across the street. Excuse me. Is Ms. Nellie Kirkland here? He handed me his business card and introduced himself as a secretary from my brother's company. He had been on a business trip from the city, where my brother's company is based, and upon hearing about the situation at the family home, he rushed to confirm it. We were having a meeting with the president of the company that was jointly launching this cafe project until just now. The president is hurrying over here, but they are very angry. After confirming David's face, the secretary continued speaking. I've heard the general gist from the president, and it seems like there will be significant liability involved. Even though you're the husband of the sister, I believe you'll have to take responsibility for that. Until now, he had only been blamed by me and Nellie, so perhaps he hadn't fully grasped the reality of the situation. When David, a stranger in a suit, heard the words liability from someone he didn't know, his face turned pale again. Mom, can we afford to pay that kind of money? What's going to happen to us? Muttered quietly, and it seemed to be the final straw for David, who slumped down on the spot. Supporting David's weak body as he sat down, we decided to return home for the time being. We invited my brother's secretary into our home, and we waited for my brother, who was traveling from New York, to arrive. We understood that things had gotten serious, but there was nothing we could do on our own. As the frustrating hours passed, my brother finally visited us around sunset. Sorry, Nellie, but David will have to take some responsibility for this. My brother said solemnly, beginning to explain the situation to us. The project to open a cafe using our family home had started shortly after our father passed away. My brother's company was well known in the industry, and the other party had prioritized the discussion presented by my brother. In other words, it means that he had been dedicating all his efforts to the joint project with my brother, even to the extent of halting the project that was underway at his own company. Now, if this cafe project were to fall through, it's clear that tremendous losses would occur. My brother has been pulling out all the stops, trying his best to keep this project going. But if the family home itself is demolished, I couldn't help but utter those words, recalling the scene I had witnessed just a while ago. I saw it myself earlier, and it was indeed a sloppy demolition job. It may take time, but since the materials are still there, it might be possible to restore it once again. My brother sighed heavily before saying so, but his expression remained stern. David, I didn't want to say this, but what you did is a crime. Apologizing won't be enough, but you'll have to accompany me on a tour of apology. Receiving the heavy words from my brother, David, still pale-faced, remained frozen in place, but slowly nodded. Just a few hours ago, he had been so full of confidence, talking about his plans for the future, but now there's no trace or shadow of that. It's embarrassing to expose such disgraceful behavior of my husband in front of my own family. It's all because I failed to see through him that I've brought about such a dire situation. My brother wouldn't blame me, but I have no intention of staying with David any longer. Legally, David and I are still married, but in my mind, he has become a complete stranger. Accompanied by my brother and his secretary, David embarked on a tour of apologies to affiliated companies, where he received scolding beyond imagination. To explain the situation, we had to tell the truth no matter what. When my brother explained the situation to the other party, even those who had been calm towards my brother began to criticize David unanimously. David, who believed that he was not being appreciated because of those around him, would easily collapse mentally if he were to be told directly to his face, "You're finished as a human." When David returned home with my brother, his eyes looked vacant as if he might collapse at any moment. Fortunately, they accepted the apologies, considering my face. But of course, they expect appropriate compensation. David, who had been escorted by my brother, must have been bombarded with questions about the specific amount of damages. It's understandable that he would be overwhelmed by that. I hate to say it, but I was at my limit as well. I thrust the documents I had prepared in front of David, who was sitting there. "Now you finally understand why you're not appreciated, don't you? You're disqualified as a human being. I've had enough of you," I clearly declared to David and urged him to fill out the divorce papers I handed him. Upon hearing a single word from his wife, who had always been compliant, David began to shed tears. "Please, don't abandon me. What will become of me like this? I quit my job too, you know? We've lived together all this time, aren't we a family?" Even though he had only considered us as a vent for his stress until now, he now recited plausible words only in such times, but it didn't affect me at all. Ignoring David's words, I continued to stare silently at the divorce papers. Anything I say here would be meaningless and wouldn't benefit David in any way. After a while, perhaps realizing that my determination was unwavering, David slowly signed. It was over now. David and I were officially strangers. Several months later, thanks to my brother's generosity, David escaped criminal prosecution, but he was left with a huge amount of debt. In addition to bearing the compensation responsibility for the project that was in progress, he was ordered to pay compensation for his criminal-like selfish actions and verbal abuse towards us due to our divorce. It was a natural consequence, but David couldn't even imagine such a simple outcome. David must have realized how many people he inconvenienced with his rash actions. Through the rounds of apologies with my brother, he must have come to understand the severity of his wrongdoing. Fortunately, in his misfortune, his boss didn't take his resignation letter seriously, sparing him from losing his job. If he had lost his job, he wouldn't have had any means to repay the enormous debt he accumulated. Although his treatment at work will likely be tougher than before, just being forgiven for such a reckless act is more than he could have hoped for. David lost his family, his assets, and even his pride in considering himself talented, all torn to shreds. This, perhaps, is the greatest punishment for him. While I was worried about how our divorce would affect Julie, she's already an adult. Contrary to my concerns, Julie didn't seem to take things too heavily. "As long as you're here, Mom, I'll be fine, and I'm already an adult," Julie replied brightly, perhaps to ease my worries. My brother's project to renovate and rebuild the family home managed to recover. With the compensation from David and the assets our father left behind, it seemed possible to live comfortably, but I was entrusted with my brother's cafe. The people from the company that launched the cafe with my brother also trusted me and assigned me various tasks. Thanks to them, I'm living more fulfilling days than I did as a full-time housewife. Working in the place where I have lived with my parents and brother is also a great joy. Married life alone is not the only joy in life. The sense of security that someone will protect you may have been lost, but in other words, it means gaining freedom. Right now, my feelings are not dark and gloomy. On the contrary, I feel more positive and hopeful. I have found a new purpose in life, and I am filled with hope.